Instead of putting your laundry in the hamper, you put it in a vase. Go down to the drugstore, pick up some odorant and perspirant. Probably have a dirty sweat sock hanging from the rearview mirror of your car. And then on a really special night, maybe a little underwear coming out of your breast pocket. Just to show her that she's important.
A total of 25 below the age of 18. Now, with us on the phone is a member of the Branch Davidians speaking from prison. Go ahead.
Is this Brad Branch?
Yes.
Mr. Branch, what have you heard about what has happened, and was this something that was predicted by David? Is this a plan?
This is a systematic character assassination by the FBI to eliminate all of the crime scene. Now they're finishing off the job right now. They're destroying the crime scene. America, this is the biggest lie that's ever been put before the American public, ever. Bill Clinton wants to use a scapegoat like the Attorney General. You know, I don't buy it.
Mr. Branch, was there no plan? All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Branch, for joining us. Now, as you can see... Yes, Dave. Yes,
Bonnie,
Michael.
let me interrupt you just for a second. Off to the right side of the screen, you can see 3 or 4 people. Apparently, it looks like federal agents out there beside the building. Now, whether they have any of the cultists with them, it's hard to tell from this vantage point, but it appears there is some movement, some people outside of the burning portion of the compound.
You're right, and they are dressed in the black SWAT outfits that are used by the FBI officials. We now have a closer shot of it. It is very difficult to see what they are doing.
And once again, let's point out that the pictures are shaky because it is very, very windy.
Hispanics, everyone.
Yes.
What is
12 to 15 rounds, and about 200 rounds of fire had been aimed at the FBI during the morning, with none being returned. But in the last half hour, I can't say.
There are prototypes there.
To a tragedy.
Vicki, throughout this 51-day siege, we seem to have seen David Koresh engaging in a number of delaying tactics. First of all, it was give me access to the radio, then I'll allow some people to leave. Then it was after Passover, the siege will be over. He was in the middle of writing his interpretation of the 7 seals. Did the FBI just see that as being another delaying tactic and said it was time to try to bring this to an end?
Yes, they did see that as just another stalling tactic. As you said, March 2nd, he said, if you play my 58-minute tape on national radio, then I will come out on March 19th. He said, oh, just give me a few more days. We're planning to come out. We'll surrender peacefully. Then he wanted to see an attorney. He and Steve Schneider wanted to see attorneys. The attorneys were allowed to go in. As a matter of fact, they were the only outsiders allowed to go inside the compound and talk with them face to face. That went on for 5 days, 1 week. And now today we are told in the briefing that David Koresh and Steve Schneider said, well, basically that really was just a delaying tactic. After that, it was Passover. The attorney said they believed that they would come out after Passover. Once Passover was nearing the end, David Koresh and Steve Schneider said, we never had any agreement that we were coming out at the end of Passover, and we want to write our interpretation of the 7 seals. David Koresh then told federal agents that he was working on those 7 seals, that he had taken 3 full days and nights writing just the first seal. Federal agents say you have to keep in mind that David Koresh is a 9th grade dropout. He says he doesn't write very well. He wanted Steve Schneider's wife to type each part of this manuscript. He wanted Steve Schneider to edit each part, and Steve Schneider said this morning he had not even started on the editing of the first seal. So federal agents had joked, kind of half jokingly, half seriously. They had said at this rate it could be 5 to 6 months before this is done. Finally they got the confirmation, they got the go-ahead from Washington to go in with the tear gas and the tanks that would batter the compound.
Vicki, at the regular FBI briefing just outside of Waco this morning, Special Agent Rick said that this was going to be another waiting game today, but a waiting game engineered by the FBI. They believed that the Branch Davidians had gas masks, which would allow them to remain immune from the tear gas for a period of up to 8 hours. They were prepared to wait it out. They said that they were not assaulting the building. Obviously, something has gone very wrong.
They continued to stress that they were not assaulting the building, but they continued, even as he was speaking, to push gaping holes in it. And just probably about a half hour ago, we noticed that one entire side of the compound had been completely demolished. Now, they say that this compound is very poorly constructed. Cult members actually built the compound themselves. It's built out of wood. I imagine with the strength of these tanks, it does not take very much. If you're trying just to poke a very concentrated hole in it, I'm sure it does not take very much for a wooden building to be completely toppled by an Army tank.
And Vicki, obviously by the pictures that we could see of the compound, it has gone up in flames quite rapidly, indicating perhaps that the construction was fairly open inside. Again, we want to repeat that there are 95 people believed to be inside that compound, 17 of them children. Vicki, we heard Special Agent Ricks this morning in his morning briefing say that he believed that there was some underground lattice work underneath the compound, perhaps as small as crawl spaces. We see in the picture, I should point out, a man walking out of the compound with his hands over his head. Is there a possibility, Vicki, that some of the people inside the compound are actually underground in shelters and may not be in the thick of things as we see this compound burning down?
There is, as you said, one person who has come out with his hands up, and there is a possibility. Agent Rick said it is like a basement, but mostly it is like a crawl space. But supposedly, cult members have been using this underground area for target training. So it is possible that some of them have gone down underneath, but with the construction of these buildings, it's going to collapse in on the crawl space or basement, no matter how deep it is. So that is not a safe area for them to be at all.
Vicki, is there any assessment by the FBI as to what the cache of weapons inside the compound is and whether there is the possibility of explosions that might be connected with this fire?
One of the things that got the ATF started on an investigation of this was that a box being shipped to the compound by UPS broke open, and inside they found hand grenades, and allegedly UPS alerted ATF that there were hand grenades going there. Now, federal agents say that they know that the Branch Davidians have at least $100,000 worth of weapons inside. Most of them, they believe, purchased legally, but also some converter kits purchased that change semi-automatic weapons into fully automatic weapons, which are illegal. And one of the things they've been very, very concerned with throughout these long 51 days is that the entire crime scene is being altered, which would include those weapons being reconverted back to their legal form, thereby destroying part of the evidence in this case.
Just want to point out that in the foreground of the picture that you're seeing, just behind the bus, we saw a man walking out with his hands over his head. There he is again. He appeared to stoop down for a moment, perhaps try to surrender to federal agents who are quite near the compound. There he is walking up to the back of what I believe to be a Bradley fighting vehicle being taken into custody by federal authorities. Vicki, at the beginning of this siege, David Koresh was boasting, saying, don't send in armored personnel carriers, don't send in armored vehicles. We have the weaponry here that would knock a Bradley fighting vehicle 50 feet into the air. Is there a worry at this time that some of that ordnance might be contained within the compound and might lead to an even further escalation of the fight?
Would have taken care of the situation quite some time ago.
What about the heat, Mr. Kloss? I mean, how?
Its own ATF agents who were involved in that initial firefight say that they did hear the type of sounds associated with extremely heavy weaponry, perhaps 50 caliber machine guns. And ATF does know from some of the autopsies and some of the shrapnel that was removed from some of the injured.
For the first time, they confirmed, and we've heard reports about this for several weeks now, that that Koresh and his followers had actually dug a giant trench and put an old school bus down inside there as a bunker. And they also mentioned other bunkers, something we hadn't known about before. But they said they described them as more like crawl spaces than bunkers. And they said that some of those crawl spaces had been flooded. We'd had heavy rains here in the last several weeks, and so that they were really unusable as bunkers. And what's interesting, Tom, is that for the longest time, cars are speeding by me here at a high rate of speed now, all sorts of emergency vehicles. At one time this morning, when we were watching all of this happen, the people inside the compound seem to be right at the windows, because, like I said, when the armored vehicle went right in the front door, somebody dropped a banner out of the second floor window just above the front door. So the people had not gone to the, at least some of them hadn't gone to the bunkers by then. But amazingly, none of those people have come out, and that would fit with what the FBI has said all along, which is David Koresh has complete control over these people. They have never equivocated from that. They said this man controls these people. They will only do what he tells them to do, every one of them, including the children. But the men and the women, all of them, will only do what David Koresh tells them to do. And apparently he hasn't told any of them to come out.
All right, we want to tell our viewers here, Jim, while you're listening in, that all of this is being monitored in Washington, obviously, by the Attorney General, Janet Reno, who is new in that job. She was at the command center, the FBI command center, early this morning. But the decisions, Justice is emphasizing, the decisions to make the initial move and what to do about this situation are being made in the field. Also monitoring this is Treasury Secretary Lloyd Benson, because he has responsibility for the agents from Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the ATF group that made the initial assault. That's when 4 federal agents were lost. That came on February 28th. It was 51 days ago. It has been a bizarre standoff, and now it has what appears to be at once a bizarre...
Reports on that. Some people have drunk gallons of it coming out. Others have said there's plenty of drinking water, but during several big rainstorms...
Via satellite from Waco, Texas. And Vicki, we just wanted to say that apparently fire trucks are on their way. They have been dispatched. They have to travel some 10 miles to the compound, but it appears at this point...
The structural unsoundness of these buildings, and it's pretty obvious.
Not going to be much left, John, and the other problem is there is not running water up there. There are no fire hydrants up there. Cult members have been using wells and a pumping system that pulls the water up, and then they bring it into the house quite often by buckets. This is not going to be fighting a fire the way you would do it in, say, an urban area where there is a fire hydrant on every corner. That's just going to make the job even tougher once they do get here.
Again, just some information to pass along to our viewers. Since this standoff began at the end of February, some 95 people have stayed with their leader, David Koresh. At least 17 of those people are children. Some 37 people have left the Branch Davidian compound over the course of this siege. This morning at about 5:55 Central Time, the FBI and Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms began a tear gassing operation. They were sending in CEVs, those are combat engineering vehicles, M60 tanks, and Bradley fighting vehicles, to try to douse the entire compound, to saturate the inside of it with tear gas. CS tear gas is how the FBI described it, a non-lethal, non-pyrotechnic form of tear gas. It's not the same type of gas that you have seen in riot control in countries like South Korea, where an officer would fire an incendiary device at a crowd. It would then explode and start sending off the gas. This was just gas that was being pumped from the snout of vehicles, that was being poked into holes that they had breached in the Branch Davidian compound. So they had tried that operation for some 6 hours. They had gone back again at about 1 o'clock Eastern Time, 12 o'clock Central Time, for another go at trying to saturate the inside of the compound. Shortly after that, white smoke was seen appearing from the roof ridge in the central part of the building, just above the front door. It was believed at that time that it might be just tear gas that had been escaping. Then suddenly, from one of the second floor windows, flames started to erupt. Within about, there we see the pictures of the initial fire getting underway. The smoke was coming from the roof line there. You see it breaching a second floor window. Within minutes after that, the entire central part of the Branch Davidian compound was in flames. And within about 5 minutes after that, it appeared as though the entire compound itself had been engulfed. We have no word on the state of the 95 people inside. We have seen 2 or 3 people come out of the compound, one person being dragged across the ground by what appeared to be a federal agent about 5 minutes ago. However, no confirmation on whether or not that was a Branch Davidian member, or if it potentially was a federal agent who was injured in the fire and all the smoke that is going on there in Texas. Vicki Maybury, who is joining us live from the compound, she has been there for the past 51 days. Any sign of emergency vehicles at this point?
John, this road is still very quiet, but we have seen a series of cars go by with flashing lights on. Inside, we believe, were heavily armed ATF agents and possibly some emergency...
And so, as Rick said, this was their next logical step. was to do something to force them to come out, but try not to harm them. Obviously, the people inside retaliated with more than 200 shots fired, according to the FBI this morning, at their armored vehicles when they were trying to knock holes in the building, or when they were knocking holes in the building. The scene here at the press center has changed dramatically. When I came this morning in the dark, there was hardly anybody here, and everything began happening at 6 o'clock Central Time. Pretty much like we expected. And the biggest hint that something was going to happen came yesterday when they started removing everything from in front of the building. And that had always been for us sort of a sign that something could happen after that. They had stored cars, trucks, buses, and debris, which we presume were used for cover, at least in the initial gunfight on February 28th.
Jim, there are two flags flying there. One a white flag with a red cross, and the other one a dark flag. What are those flags? Do you know from your earlier assignments there?
There was a Star of David flag. Is this at the compound? Because you have a better view of this than I did.
At the compound, right.
I did not. There was a flag with the Star of David on it that had been flying there for some time. In recent days, it stayed there, and it was the only flag. You say you see a second flag now?
Yeah, there are two flags. I don't know what they are. The armored personnel carriers are moving around now. This is almost burned to the ground. It has been a raging fire, and it's been going on for how long at this point, Jim?
I would say it's been going on 20 minutes.
Yeah, boy, it burned everything very quickly.
Yeah.
Obviously, it was set because it moved through there and fed on that was a, stucco and wood compound?
It was, mostly wood. And it was wood frame, and this morning FBI agent Ricks was asked about the construction.
Right.
He said it was flimsy. And that was one of the reasons I think they were nibbling away at the corners.
Yeah, we can see the federal troops that were in the APCs out and walking about.
Can you?
Maybe what we ought to do is that if we have some videotape of the earlier punching through, we can show that now. These pictures are pretty much the same. We just cannot imagine what is going on or what has happened to the people inside there.
We're at the ready. They had the hospital prepared. They were going to take in the 3 or 4 wounded members of the cult, Koresh included, but then nothing happened. David Koresh explained he had been told by God to wait and that he would not come out until God told him to come out.
Bonnie, we are seeing the first Waco fire truck.
We want our phone back again. Does the FBI have any idea as to whether or not the Branch Davidian wanted to resume negotiations in this?
John, just a minute. Let me interrupt you because right now we do have a whole convoy of emergency vehicles coming up this road, leading up there. This looks like probably the fire chief and fire marshals, and we have, at this point, 2 fire engines. That was 2 emergency vehicles preceded by what looked like 2 fire chiefs' cars. I can tell you that we also have more coming up the road in just a minute.
Mm-hmm. Again, back to what we were talking about before we saw the fire apparatus go by, was there any word from the FBI that the Branch Davidian members were prepared to resume negotiations, asking that their phone service be restored?
What they said was when they first called in and said, okay, if you don't come out, we're going to start pumping tear gas in there, they said Steve Schneider immediately slammed down the phone, and in fact, they believe what he did was throw the phone out of the front door, and they think that may have severed the lines. After the tank started to batter the building and the tear gas started coming in, he did, as you say, coming in, including at this point, that was 2 additional fire trucks, that is followed by an ambulance, and that is followed by another police car coming in, following up this convoy. I'm looking down the road now, and at this point, we don't see any more.
Vicki, I know that you have been on the air with us since this fire broke out, but are there any reports coming to you from our producers there in Waco, Texas, as to how many people have come out, whether or not the FBI has taken people into custody. We saw one picture where it seemed as though one person was surrendering. Do we know if that's all that has come out, or have there been more?
As far as we can tell, I am told that that one person came out with his hands up, and that, as you said, there was another person who appeared to be dragged. We don't know still if that was a federal agent or if that was a member of the cult.
We should point out to you that in Washington, a spokesperson for the FBI says they do not believe that any incendiary devices were used in this tear gassing operation. Special Agent Ricks, in his morning briefing earlier today, made a special point of saying that they were using a non-pyrotechnic form of tear gas.
As an example of being
Pound itself to even begin to put what little water they have access to on that fire.
Years with the Bible, claimed when he helped form Branch Davidians that he was the reincarnation of Jesus Christ. Seventh-day Adventist Church, of which he claimed to be a part, denounced his claims. And he has been running this cult for several years now and has managed to recruit members from as far away as Australia. He resisted pleas from his mother to give up. His lawyer, who was brought in from, was it Dallas or Houston? Houston, I guess, Jim.
Yes, he came in from Houston.
Right. Thought that they had worked out a deal as well, and then that disappeared.
We, those of us who've been here since the beginning, Tom, observed when the lawyer, Dick DeGuerin, came in, that his hope, he was hopeful. And a lot of us who had been around had realized that David Koresh...
Down the road, this is where reports...
Very sensitive. And it blinds you, too. Yeah. You can't see.
Try to do what they can in terms of saving anyone still inside the fire. No word from David Koresh, as far as we know, over the past couple of hours. He was told this morning that the FBI would begin, as they did, to put tear gas into the buildings one by one, knocking down bits of wall first. There you see a tank, and this is live picture of the Branch Davidian complex. But these tanks would be used to knock down bits of the wall. Tear gas would be inserted. Let us know it is.
Have you reached a verdict?
They knew where the children were, they knew where the women were, they knew where the men were, they knew where the weapons were inside of there. They thought they would be able to go in, get the women and children into a safe spot, get the weapons sequestered in one area, get the men sequestered in another area. They certainly did not plan for this raid to go down the way it did.
Here too that we want to bring up, and that is that you see all this glamour, right?
Fire operation and tactics involved, they'd be there for a great deal of time doing the salvage and overhaul to make sure the building's out. Now, I heard you ask earlier about the bunker, and the law enforcement official was correct that the fire burns up and the heat burns up. But as the building collapses, that would prevent any escape from that bunker, at least on the top of the building.
About the underground bunker, can people survive if they were in that underground bunker underneath what is happening right now?
Well, I don't know that much. I've watched your coverage for the last 45 days, and I don't know the construction or the type of ventilation system they have. No one can survive smoke products if they're exposed to them unless they have what we call self-contained breathing apparatus, or the air bottles that the firefighters wear on their back. If there's some type of filtration system, or it has an airtight system that draws air, maybe from another location rather than around the fire, I would imagine they could survive. But nobody can survive the products of fire or smoke.
Mr. Hines, please stand by for just a moment. I'd like to ask you some more questions, but first Cheryl Atkinson is with us with some late-breaking news.
Well, Bonnie, this report, the White House says that according to its Justice Department, the cult members apparently set that fire that is consuming the compound near Waco, Texas. Of course, there was no way to know for certain how that fire started, the speculation that it had come from inside, and now the White House is quoting its Justice Department people as saying the cult members did set that fire. Bonnie?
Mr. Hines, just judging by how quickly it spread, was it your belief as well that this was not just a fire that spread in its natural progression, but was indeed perhaps aided?
Well, the fire folks in Waco, or the county around Waco, could provide you more information as to the construction of the building, but it appeared to be ordinary wood construction, and as I saw the fire unfold, I don't know whether there was some type of an accelerant or they set the building to burn. That would be something that could be determined by the alcohol, tobacco, and firearms folks, along with the state agency down there. But it definitely was burning with a great deal of ferocity.
At this point, what kind of effect could 2 fire trucks have on this? I mean,
a federal agent who was involved in what was a quick response rescue operation, perhaps calling over some more help, perhaps directing in the firefighting apparatus that has been brought in from about.
And if you order with...
If people understand why I should...
Attached to the end of the boom.
Looking as...
are said to be alive, that they escaped in some fashion. We had one report of 1 getting out at least, but now Justice Department sources are saying that at least 6 got out.
As you know, it was, I think, what, at least a half dozen, maybe 9 buildings in the compound. So many of the pictures don't reflect the actual size of the compound because they were taken at different times. But there were a lot of places to go. But from where you are, Tom, can you see, are any of them standing?
It doesn't look that we're now on pictures of the fire trucks and the helicopter, but no, it looks like it's now been burned absolutely to the ground. We're not seeing anything else in the telescopic shot that we see there. And on...
As late as this morning, a complex that, as best we can tell, housed 95 people, including 17 children. And then about an hour ago now, fire erupted as the FBI was engaged in this operation of pumping tea.
Coming up from the A.
Give me back my curlers.
Died in what he would call the Armageddon, but they said they truly believe that he really is a very egotistical person and that in the end he would want to save himself. So if we believe what the FBI has told us about David Koresh, and it's very hard to tell since we have no phone communication with him, so you go on what we are told by the FBI. If you can go by that, then no, this is not surprising at all to find that they may possibly have set the fire themselves.
Vicki Mabry, we just want to break away from Waco, Texas for just a moment to try to find out a little bit more about how this fire at the Branch Davidian compound that broke out some 45 minutes ago got started. Rita Braver is standing by now in our Washington bureau. Rita, how does the FBI know that this fire was started from inside?
Well, sources are telling me here in Washington that FBI snipers who were perched all around the window and basically had views of almost every window in the compound looked in and actually saw members setting the place on fire, almost a group of them doing it simultaneously while they looked on in horror. I was also told that actually one member of the U.S. law enforcement groups, possibly a member of the FBI's hostage rescue team, which of course has been on the scene here, actually pulled a member of the compound cult out of the burning building. They are not sure at all about what has gone on in terms of the death and devastation inside, and they really don't know if there are any people in those tunnels downstairs who may be saving themselves in some way. But the word that we are hearing here in Washington was that there was no incendiary device set off by the FBI, that this was in fact a fire that was deliberately set by cult members. And they also insist that they had no indication that any kind of suicide attempt like this was planned. You heard the FBI chief on the scene down there earlier today saying that they really were pretty sure that there wasn't a mass suicide contemplated. I think there is going to be a lot of evaluation when all of this is over.
Rita, the fire seemed to happen coincidentally with the last part of the tear gassing operation, as we saw the snout of an M60 tank pointed inside the front door that was injecting more tear gas into what appeared to be an already saturated compound. Is anybody talking about the possibility that this fire was set in conjunction with that tear gassing operation to make it appear as though it was part of the FBI's operation?
No one has suggested that to me, and really what all I have are second-hand reports which have been given to the FBI here in Washington and to others around the city from those on the scene. There are a lot of, as you can imagine, telephone channels being worked between Waco and Washington. You've got to remember that this is this administration's first big law enforcement effort. And earlier today, the Attorney General, the FBI Director were all huddled in the FBI worried exactly about this kind of disaster, because once you start moving military operations towards civilians, you are going to really be playing with fire, as was the case right here.
Let's go back to Waco, Texas now. Vicki Mabry, firefighting apparatus and emergency crews have been on the scene now for about 5 minutes. There does not appear, though, to be much left to save.
John, the fire at this point looks to be almost completely out. The fire trucks that we saw going in, we can't say for sure that those were the first ones to arrive on the scene. The FBI and the ATF have maintained much closer to the compound a staging area and kind of their headquarters up there. They may have had apparatus on the scene already, but as we talked about, the buildings apparently are so poorly constructed and made of wood that once they're set, it's entirely possible that they would just go up just like tinder. So it's really hard to say.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Vicki, but it appears as though the fire started in the same section of the Branch Davidian compound as the initial ATF assault was carried out on February 28th.
It's very hard to say. I wish I could answer that one. It's very hard to tell inside those windows. What they did that day was surround the entire building, but what happened, the TV reporters and the photographers who were on the scene first were just confined to one particular area, so we really couldn't say that it happened in that particular area. They were completely around that building, firing in on all sides.
Do you have any preliminary reports at this time of how many people have come out of that building?
As you said earlier, we have seen that one person coming out with his hands up, one being dragged away. Still no confirmation, trying to get that for you, on whether the second person being pulled out was an FBI or federal agent, or whether that was a cult member. But so far, no others seen coming outside of the compound.
As Rita Braver told us from our Washington bureau just a few moments ago, she had a report of an FBI agent who had rescued somebody from the Branch Davidian compound. So perhaps that person that we saw being dragged along the ground about 15 minutes ago was a member of the Branch Davidian sect. The president was informed early this morning